Good afternoon and welcome to session 2 of Build Better, Live Better. Before we begin, a few housekeeping issues to run through. We are recording today's session, so please switch off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. Please log your questions and your comments in the chat box. As we go through, these will be picked up by our chair for this afternoon's session. Engage with us online using the hashtag #AOUHousing. And a quick plug for our next major event, the 15-minute city, which is being delivered with the Urban Design Group. A thanks to our supporters and sponsors for today, the RAAI and Reddy Architecture and Urbanism. And more widely, our Academy sponsors. This session today and other sessions could not be delivered without their support. Our next major event on housing will be delivered in February on the 12th, so please add that date to your diary. And with that, I'll hand over to Tony Reddy, who is chair of the Academy of Urbanism. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Stephen. I have an important announcement. We're changing the order of this afternoon session because our keynote speaker, Tina Saaby, is being called away to another event, but she's kindly agreed to reschedule. So we're going to deal with the keynote speech earlier, and then we'll revert back to the original program, and my colleague Biljana Savic will take over the proceedings from there as chair. Just to talk a little bit about Tina, she was the city architect for Copenhagen from 2010 to the end of 2018. And for many academicians and members of the Academy, they will be familiar with her work in that role. I mean, she's been an inspirational city architect, and she's been responsible for a huge number of initiatives in the city of Copenhagen's architectural policy. She also, and this is an important part that I suspect will relate to what the talk she's going to give today, she supported an agenda of developing a sustainable and living city by engaging in the creation of a resilient strategic framework for future city development. And I think that that theme of resilience will be one that will permeate her talk. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tina Saaby to you. Thank you.
Cool. That was the opening for me, Tony, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Good to be back with all you academicians from UK. I will now share the screen here. And I won't talk so much about the architecture policy and some of the livability strategies that I've sometimes have done. So today I'll try to focus on housing. And of course, I will try to focus on, as far as I can, on how to deliver affordable housing. So I'll go through here. So first, thank you for the introduction. And I also have some knowledge and experience from being a partner in my own office. So I also know a bit of how to build and the contracts that we are dealing with. And I have a little bit of international experience as well from being a jury member and having given lectures all around, and also been a visiting professor in Sheffield. And then I'm right now not the city architect in Copenhagen any longer, but I'm the city architect in Gladsaxe, which is a suburban area just north of Copenhagen. And as I just said in our chat before, the small group that were the organizing group, that it's a lot more difficult than being a city architect in one of the bigger cities, because the challenges in the suburban area is quite big, I think. So today I will talk about housing, as I said before, and I'll try to talk about different types of ownership and different types of housing. And then I also try to reflect a little bit on the quality, the architectural quality of it, how housing is experienced from the inside and from the outside. And then I hope that we can go through some cases after that. The mixing, oops, sorry. The mixing the city as a coherent city is an important issue. And I think that has not so much to do alone with the housing policy, but it is also a lot to do with how we look at cities in general. This is an image of a new detailed plan in the middle of the harbor in Copenhagen, and it is called the Pier Island. And this image is, it's not a big neighborhood, but it's a clear neighborhood with a mixing of function. So it is both a public, a new swimming hall. It is also shops and an office building, but it is also a housing area and a housing neighborhood. It is mixed in ownership, so there is both affordable housing and there is also a private owned housing in it. But it's also a mixing of the outdoor area. So nothing is in that way gated. The mixing of guests to the small island is mixed with the everyday life in the area, and it is also mixed with the people coming from the harbor and the sea. And I think this focusing on the word mixed is something that we might have a reflect on later on as well. This is also mixing the city. So where you can say the paper island is on a medium level, it's a neighborhood. Then you can also talk about mixing the city on a building level. This is a building designed by Dorte Mandrup, a Danish architect, and the site was owned by the city. Then we were selling the site, and as a part of that, we did a competition where we invited different developers with architects to try to deliver a mixed program. And it ended up with retail in the bottom, and then there is a sports building that we are renting back in the city. And on top of this, there is private owned apartments. So the whole mixing again within one site and within one building is also a way of trying to talk about the mixed city. And if we talk about mixed, then we can go a little bit down to the housing issues. And this is in a way the mixed ownership. And in a way, we have four kind of different ownerships when we talk on both a national level in Denmark in general, and then also on a Copenhagen level. And I think there is something to reflect on also in the resiliency in having different kind of ownership. So of course there is the owner occupied, that is 19% of the Copenhagen housing. The private rented is also quite normal to have. And then I think the two other one is the one that where we in one way or the other is also on a government level can discuss how much to pay and how it becomes affordable. And in a way you can say it's resilient also because by having different kind of ownership, the different ownership is also pushing each other to be in a dialogue. So because the affordable housing stock have a maximum of rent, then the private rent cannot just top it. So in a way, the private rent is also connected to the affordable housing rent, which is lower normally. So in a way, they are also challenging each other, the different kind of ownership. I will talk a little bit about the cooperative housing and the affordable housing before I go further. The cooperatives is something that started or had a boom in the 80s and 90s where Copenhagen was bankrupt and all the old building stock were very, very bad. There was no toilet in the housing. There were no outdoor areas in the housing. There were no shower in the housing. It was petroleum that you were heating with. The windows were bad. It was really all the building stock in Copenhagen in general were very, very poor. So on the national level, they started to have a program for urban renewal. And there was a program that went into a building level where we could get more or less free. Now it's not free, but we have you can still have money to help to renovate the building. So therefore, the building stock came from very poor and bad housing to now being quite well housing in general. And also the outdoor areas, there is a free program where everybody can apply for getting a free garden. And it means that, again, it's also upgrading the housing stock in general. This is from my own garden, where we now, I lived before in a cooperative place where some of my family members is still living. The cooperative had a very lower, in a way you can say, lower rent. It's still going on. There is still, as you could see before, a lot of cooperative. It's beginning again to be something that we built for also a new cooperative. But it is connected a lot with national policy. It is, of course, connected with how the economy market and the bank is putting in different incentives for getting loans and things like that. So again, it is connected a lot with the policy also on a national level and not only on a city level. Then there is the whole affordable housing, which is quite an institution, and it goes back to the 30s in Denmark. It's non-profit social housing organization, so they're non-profit. There is a lot of tenant democracy, so every neighborhood has its own tenant democracy. It's affordable housing for everyone, which means that there is no income limit. So I'm also on list for affordable housing in different places in both Denmark in general and in Copenhagen. It's almost 20% of the whole population in Denmark, which is 1 million people living in affordable housing. And it's dwellings both for families. You can also have students affordable housing, and there is also affordable housing, which is especially for elderly people. It is supervision by the municipality, which means that the city municipality always also gives money for the affordable housing. And it is a balanced rent, so there is a maximum on the rent. The old affordable housing neighborhoods has no loans today, so that is very, very cheap. Of course, when we have the new affordable housing neighborhoods, the rent is a little bit higher because they have to adopt new loans that they have to pay off. So in that way, you can say there is a little bit diversity in the old neighborhoods and in the new neighborhoods. So in Copenhagen, it is now, in the new neighborhoods, we try to go for not 20%, but we actually try to go for 25% of affordable housing. And some of the affordable housing is also where the municipality can go for some social housing. So in the neighborhood of affordable housing, it's also some of the people that is having social housing that is living in those areas. It's very important for the coherent city. It's very important for the politicians, both on a national level and also on a city level. And some of them really have a long waiting list. So some of the places where I'm on the waiting list, it can go for 30 years before there will be a chance to get some of the housing, also because it's very good architecture. That was a little bit about the different types. Now I'll try to talk a little bit about what to call home, and that is seen from the inside and from the outside. Because it's not only about, of course, it's not only about ownership. It plays quite a big role, but it is also about how we talk about architecture quality in general. And I think a lot of housing in Denmark in general is quite of high quality, also in the inside. And one of the issues is that we have quite and especially in Copenhagen, we have quite a focus on daylight in general. So daylight means a lot for the way that we talk about how to live in the building. In the affordable housing, because the city is paying 10% of the affordable housing, then we also have quite a lot of architectural discussions about how the affordable housing should be also from the inside. And that, again, it pays off also for the private housing, because the private housing don't want to make housing that is more bad than the affordable housing. And it's the same architects that is designing the different kind of housing. So the high standard on the affordable housing pays off also on the private housing. But when we go into our local plan, our detailed plans, we put a lot of regulation also on how to get good daylight into the building. So one of the things is that we normally talk of a maximum depth of the building on 12 meters, and then the height of 2.5, which means that there will be enough daylight into the apartment inside. And normally we also say that you need to have daylight at least from 2 sides when you talk about each housing unit. And that means, of course, that the quality of the different spaces inside is quite high. And because we pay, as I said before, money to the housing organizations, this is one of our new projects. It's affordable housing for elderly people. But because we go and look at the quality of architecture, we are also a part of developing the project. And it means that we go inside also to talk about how we organize the whole layout of the affordable housing area. And I won't go in detail with it. It was more to say that there is a discussion within the city municipality with the city architect about how can we organize the layout also of the housing inside to get good housing for families. So this is it's a row house, it's private owned, where you can see that there is a lot of daylight and a lot of work with the spatiality of the housing. So this is a private, this one is not affordable. So this is a private owned, and this is the same building from the outside. It is designed by a Danish office called Vandkunsten, and it will take me outside. So that was a little bit from the inside and what we can do as the city to push a high quality of affordable housing inside, and of course of housing in general. And this is from the outside, and that means also a lot when we talk about how to call a place a home, that we need also on a city level to push the discussion of what is the neighborhood and what is the livability from the outside. And when we go to the affordable housing, this is from one of the area, it will also be a lot of discussion about how to make urban space. In the detailed plan, we will put down the sun and shadow analysis, and we will put down elements of nature, the amount of nature. We will put down and say that for every housing, there should be 40% of all built area that will be outdoor space for the housing unit. And that is both for the private, but also from the affordable and the public housing. So in general, there is also a quite high quality of outdoor areas. And this is one of the affordable housing complex neighborhoods in the city. And this is a mixed, and it goes down to the discussion about the mixed neighborhood as we were talking about before. This is both private owned and affordable housing. And you can't see which one is affordable housing and which one is private owned, and then not that affordable. So one of the ideas is also that by the idea of the mixed city, it has also to be mixed in a way where you can't see who is the them and who is us. And as a part of that, it is very important that the outdoor area is open for everybody. It is without fencing, it is without making privacy, and it is without signs saying that you are not allowed to go here. The last point I will try to talk about when we talk about it from the outside is also the general layout of the city. So if we talk about housing, and it is both affordable housing and also private owned, it is very important. The idea of the mixing city is very important, that we also talk about how we can make a coherent city. And one element, and there is a lot of element in that discussion that we could go through about the cloudburst and climate change and things like that. But one of the very important things is that it is accessible for everybody on foot and by bicycle. And having a city that is accessible for everybody, then it is also a good city, both for the people living in the affordable housing and for people in general. And especially when we talk about having a city for kids and for old people, the idea of having the freedom to be able to go around the city yourself with your friends or in a low when you're a kid, and if you're an old person, the city is accessible also, even though you don't have a car or is having maybe your health is not that good any longer. Then it's very important that you can go out, and that you can go out both summer and winter, that our maintenance of the city is also based on the idea of cleaning the bike lanes and get it free for snow before the road, and in general to be aware of that it has to be accessible all around the year. But there is a lot of discussion when we talk about the bigger strategic thinking of the city that has an input and an impact on how to do good housing areas and how to do affordable housing. And do affordable housing is also, in a way you can say, it's also important that the responsibility for the outdoor area is taken by the public, so that you don't have low quality outdoor areas in the affordable housing area. So there has to be some kind again of idea that is on a human basis and on a city responsibility, and not for the specific neighborhood alone. I will try to talk of some of the projects. I can see I have 7 minutes, so I might go through some of them a little bit fast, but it's also just to give you a little bit of idea of what it could be. This is a part of affordable housing organization. It is a concept called Bolig Plus. It is a concept where the people, it is a partnership between the local people that is living in the area, the local government, and the social housing organization. And one of the things is that they are taking care of the maintenance themselves, which means that the rent again will go down. The whole way of building the concept is built in materials or in a construction methods that is cheaper than building in concrete. So it is a light building. So a lot of incentives that will actually go in and also be a part of the partnership, but also be a part of getting the rent a little bit more down than in other areas. The concept is that the ground floor is for old people, so that is without any stairs. And then on top of that, there is a row housing, so you don't need an elevator or you don't need stairs in that way. So it is within the building regulation. And it is a concept that is adaptable to different sites. So in a way, you can say it is a concept that is where the building method is designed one time, but the way to puzzle it down to the specific site is very easy to do it on a site-specific level, and a lot of good outdoor area as a part of it. This is an example of how to make a cooperative. This is a new housing area. It's private owned. And the owner of this site was very aware, and he was agreeing with us that it should be a mixed area because the neighborhood was so big. So the neighborhood is in general with all 4 kinds of ownership in this neighborhood. And he is one of the first ones that started to do new cooperatives in general. This is the garden in the middle. It's the old warehouse that is now transformed into a public space for everybody. And this is from the rendering of one of the new cooperative. And in general, in a cooperative, you have to pay a deposit. So in that way, you can say there is a little bit of storage or of money bank into it. So you need to have a little bit of money, or you have some kind of agreement with the bank. But it's a very low deposit compared to what it would mean if you have to go and buy an apartment. And then you can actually have a monthly rent that is quite low, similar to the affordable housing organization. A lot of people have the feeling that they want also to make, in a way, to start to what is the English word when they start to spare money. So they want, or a lot of money wants to start to owe something as a part of their idea of life. This is a private rent. It's an example of a temporary area where it is a living area in containers, which I normally do not like. But this is just an example of how private rent can be affordable and still have a lot of housing quality, both housing quality from the inside, but also housing quality from the outside. So it is containers where you have a lot of daylight. 2 young people is living together in the boxes. The boxes is Maersk containers, and they will have leasing them. The window is from Velfag. They are also leased for a 10-year period because it is temporary. So they will give back the windows after 10 years as well. But a lot of community is a part of the whole concept of Copenhagen containers. So they are not only building the housing, but they are also building the possibility for a lot of communities to be a part of it. And this is another private rent. It's an old school. I think most people will probably have the idea that it should be taken down. It's a pension company that bought it, and they have transformed it also into youth housing. And they have also been aware of private youth housing rent can actually grow as big as it wants because we cannot control it. So therefore, the dialogue about keeping down the rent is also something that you have to facilitate as the city. This is a pension company that has been transforming this old building into a very beautiful new housing. And the last project is an example of a new building that is owned by the city. We don't have that much government-owned housing in general, but we have a few buildings that is special for a special group of people. So it is social housing. This is a new project that is designed by CCO architects. It is in the old neighborhood of Copenhagen. It is housing for a specific group of young people that has difficulties by taking care of themselves, but they are not that bad that they need a grown-up to be there. So we will try to help them to be able to live their own life. This is from the background. This is from the inside. Again, we can talk about daylight as a part of also the way of entering into our housing in general. This is from the outdoor area on the terrace. Yeah. Then there was one more project, and that is also some affordable housing. And it is a community flats where the affordable housing organization is trying to make some kind of community for the people. So it is a transformation of an old building where three apartments is owning this space together. So there is 3 families. It's affordable housing, so they stand on the list. So it's not free who you're going to live with. So it is affordable housing by names on the list. And then the 2 apartments that is there already can interview the next one on the list. And then they have 3 chances to say, we want to live together with them. So again, it's just to show some kind of innovation from also this listing that is a part of the affordable housing, that it is for everybody and everybody can go to the list, but you can also in a way make some community, smaller communities within this idea of democracy or right for everybody, you can say. I think that was 20 minutes, very fast. And it's so difficult when you can't have eye contact with all you guys sitting out there. But
you did very, very well. Really, really well. And it was really, really interesting. I just to say to everyone in the audience that the facility is there to ask questions, and I don't see any quite yet. So I'm going to ask 1 or 2 of my own and 1 or 2 from the morning while others think of what they'd like to ask you. The first question I wanted to ask you was that what really impresses us all when we see Danish and generally Nordic housing and communities is, and your presentation was simply fantastic, but what is impressive is that we have lived in a world where over the past 20 to 40 years, the UK and Ireland were once leaders in the field of provision of affordable and social housing. Indeed, Britain itself was probably where it all began. It is an irony that in the Anglophone world, I believe it's Anglo-American, there's a conventional wisdom now that has seeped into our culture that home ownership really takes precedent, and we've wound down other aspects. What really struck me about what you spoke about was the resilience and the evenness of, I think from memory it was 21% affordable, owner occupied 19, private rental 27, and cooperative 33. I mean, we don't have that in most of the Anglophone world. We don't have that. So maybe you might just comment on what makes you different, because it's very
yeah, I think it's a complicated question, and I don't have a precise answer to that. If you look at the social housing, it is a long tradition. So it is something that we, in a way, you can say, on a more systematical level, decided going back to the 30s that we would do affordable housing in that way. And I know that it is not something. In the beginning, I thought everybody did that. That was in a way of organizing housing all over the world. And now I know that it is a special thing that you have housing organized in that way. So it's not something that you can just build up overnight. So in that way, I don't know how that could inspire somebody, but in a way, I hope it could inspire to start to have a discussion on how can we organize housing in a way where nobody should owe something or earn something on it. So in a way, you can say the normal money that goes into the market, here it goes into making better quality. And I think that you can start to have a discussion on a national political level. How can we actually do that? And then hopefully maybe to try to do it today, in the world today, it might also be with a lot of new social element into it. So it could be interesting to see how could non-profit housing organization, if you have to build it up from today, how could you actually organize it in a more democratic way than we did in the Nordic country. But as I also said in the presentation, and I also think it has something to do also with the quality of architecture and planning system in general. So I think it also means a lot that we have dialogues about life qualities and what it means to feel at home in a lot of other situations all over. Every discussion we are having in the city municipality, it has to deal with the discussion of human beings and how we can create good places. So that is also a way to begin to talk about it. where it's not necessary to build up a new system of housing organizations.
Okay. There's an interesting question in here. The questions are coming fast and furiously now, but Biljana Savic, my colleague, has asked, interesting that councils are leading by example rather than by regulating for design quality. Are you seeing evidence of the private sector following?
Evidence. I can go and see the private housing in general, and of course there is something I can also criticize, and it is going really, really fast in Denmark these days. But in general, if you go into the housing, there is a good daylight. You can see that the quality of the housing in general is quite high. You don't have big apartments without any daylight or only daylight from one side. So in that way, I think that there is a big impact on the private market as a part of it. So it's not, I can say that I can see that it makes 20% impact or something like that. But when I go and see all the private housing, I think that it is quite high quality in general. And also you can see that the difference between the private rent and the rent for the affordable housing is not that big. Of course it's bigger, but in a way I think that it will still regulate the market a little bit, that you have the affordable housing as a part that everybody can choose.
A number of people have asked about the interim position where someone is on a waiting list, but Janet Sutherland covers that and covers another important point which I know she raised this morning and it didn't get dealt with. Her question is the affordable housing allocation just by length of time on the waiting list and not by need as well? Do you have a problem of older people no longer being able to pay private rent and needing to move to affordable? I think that probably applies to many countries and is likely to increase. Yeah.
Yes and no. They can't just go into normal housing if they are not on the list. But again, if there is special affordable housing units that is for old people in general. So there is specific list for old people where you can apply for an old building. And I was just talking with one of the citizens here yesterday in this neighborhood, and he was saying that they need to go for a new apartment because he was old and there was one close by, so now he's on the list and they think it's housing for elderly people, and he thought that it would go quite fast, that he would go into a new apartment. But it can be difficult to get into some of the new neighborhoods. Again, there is also, as I said, there is 30% that is social housing. So we have, as the city in general, we have access to 30% that we can advise different kind of people having specific needs to go to the apartment. And we can also subsidize the rent a little bit within some of the neighborhoods. So you can, if we talk about some of the deprived area, you can subsidize the rent so that we can try to get people with diversity to go into some of the deprived area if they have job and a specific salary or things like that. So in a way, you can be a little bit strategic also in looking at the rents and the list. But I think if I have to be critical about it, I would say that some of the very, very good neighborhoods, and especially here in Gladsaxe, where I am now, I'm amazed about those neighborhoods. It's old row houses from the 40s and 50s. They are beautiful. They are with handcraft. They are with good landscape design. But the list is very, very difficult to access. So I was saying, is it possible for me to move into some of those areas, not being on the list? And that is not possible. So in a way, you can say that there is something about this listing that in a way, if you are the lucky one, you have an easier chance. And when I say that a little bit critical, then the people living in those areas say, yeah, but we are the people that is normally we are normally the group of people that don't have that many resources. So why shouldn't we have this special resource that we have easy access to those apartments? So of course you can look at it from different views, and it is more complex than that.
I'm going to put two questions here now. The first one, they're related. The first one is from Kevin Murray, which is, what are the different kinds of challenges in the suburbs? Density, culture, identity, fear of change. And the other one is, mightn't initially appear, but I think it is, sorry, I have it here from, if I can find it. I maybe let you deal with that one on its own, and I'll come back on the other one. Don't worry. So what is the difference in the suburbs in terms of challenge?
Yeah, what is the difference? I think when we talk about this suburban area, the difference is that talking about to Copenhagen or the inner part of Copenhagen is the density of the area. So we talk a lot about how can we get livability and how can we get a safe community around some of those areas where the density is very, very low. And that is so complicated because the citizens and the politicians, they want more livability, but they don't want more density. So of course there is a different complexity than what I'm normally used to from talking about the bigger cities, where you think you have too much livability and you think that the city is too dense. So what I'm reflecting a lot about right now is how can we loan, and maybe how can we, they don't have to look alike, the big cities and the inner part of the city with the suburban, but there is something where you can say, we might in a way take a little bit of the density out of the inner part of the city and pull a little bit of the density into the suburban area, so that we can get a little bit more diversity, livability, safety, yeah, a lot of those elements that is needed in a lot of suburban area. Another discussion is the car discussion, because suburban is bigger, then people have the idea that they need a car, and a lot of them also actually need a car. So therefore there is a car discussion that makes noise all over the suburban areas. When I was planning and living in the inner part of Copenhagen, it was silent. I couldn't hear any cars, I couldn't hear any noise. And now I'm working in a suburban area, and I haven't been anywhere in this neighborhood where it was silent. I can hear cars everywhere. And that is really something, when we talk about housing quality, that is something that is really, really, really influencing the way that we talk about how to build housing in general. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you, I'm being told we're running out of time, but a double question this time. They're both related. First one is from Kuan Lo. You mentioned how high quality design of affordable housing in Copenhagen makes private developers design and build better also. This is not so apparent in the UK, or indeed I might add Ireland. What makes private developers in Denmark different from those in the UK? Does market demand have something to do with this? And then the other question is from Alice Gibson in the same vein. Do you think that Danish private developers have a more altruistic outlook as a result of the council's policy and cultural acceptances of affordable cooperatives? Are they less concerned with profit and more concerned in building a better legacy communities, more open to dialogue?
Yeah.
Probably goes to
I have never ever met any developer or investor, either in the world or in Denmark or in Copenhagen, that wanted to build bad buildings. Nobody wants to build bad buildings. Everybody wants to be proud of the building that he or she is paying for. So therefore, I think a lot has to do with the way that we organize the dialogue, the way that we as governments, both on a national level and on a city level, starts to facilitating the process in a different way. The city municipalities have to be very ambitious on strategic thinking. If the cities do not have any strategic thinking, we don't have anything to say to the developers. This is what we want. So the cities and the politicians need to talk about what kind of cities and places do we want, Otherwise, the developer don't know what to talk into. So in a way, every developer is embracing every dialogue. Of course, he's talking about money. And of course, that is something that we also, as the public and the cities, have to be aware of, that if we are not respecting his business and his idea of having a business, then of course we can't have a dialogue. So the cities have to learn a little bit of economy, a little bit of money, a little bit of contracting, a little bit of the private world. Otherwise, we can't ask good questions. The cities have to be strategic. That is a part of it. And then the last thing about the one that the market and the learning from the affordable housing, because the affordable housing is quite good. The private developer, the builder, the private builder wants to do it better. And he has been out looking at it as well. People is talking about it. The newspaper is showing them we have prices for good housing. So therefore, they see also the affordable housing, even though it's not a part of their market or their business case. And of course, they push that discussion. So in that way, I know we don't need to give a lot of prices in the world, but sometimes a price can also be, for a time period, can be something that that can push the private market into some direction.
I think I firstly, just to say to you, this conversation could go on for another hour, but I'm being told we're already over time.
Yeah, it's a shame we don't. It's a shame we don't have a dinner or.
Yeah. When COVID is over, we will do that. But just to say to you, Tina, as always, it's been a really fascinating presentation, and there is so much material to discuss among us all for a long time to come. I want to thank you for it. I also think that your final notes, and I think it is one of the messages we have to learn from Denmark and the Nordic countries, is that the exemplars of the involvement of local authorities in setting high standards that permeates to the private sector is a message that should spread back to the Anglophone world in general. So thank you very much on behalf of the Academy for today. Thank you. I'd ask everyone to thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
I'm now, and I know I've run over time, and I apologize, Biljana. I'm going to hand over to my fellow director, Biljana Savic, who's now going to chair the remainder of the proceedings. Thank you, Biljana.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks, Tony, and fantastic to see so many of you on the call, and recognizing lots of names, people who have joined our previous events on affordable housing. So just a short introduction by me, introduction that was meant for the beginning of this session, but because of the Tina's scheduling problem, we had to rejig the program a bit. So a bit about why we're doing this and what we're going to hear in the rest of this session this afternoon. So for those of you who are new to the Academy of Urbanism, the Academy was founded on the belief that we all have an equal right to a good quality home and a good quality living environment. So affordable housing has always been a really important theme for us, and we intensified our activities related to affordable housing in the last couple of years simply because we see the affordable housing crisis deepening all around us. So for instance, we've supported Clarion Housing Association in setting up the first prize for design and placemaking in affordable housing. And it's called the William Sutton Prize. And we're now in the third year of that prize. And we've been very actively involved in judging the submissions, a fantastic range of ideas submitted for the prize. Obviously, we had the Congress last year in Eindhoven dedicated to affordable housing, and I believe many of you attended, and you've seen the range of policy and practical ideas for improving housing across Europe and beyond Europe. And then we had the housing event in February when we continued that conversation, and we also published our housing report at the end of last year. So I believe many of us, I am certainly being disheartened by what's happening with the affordable housing in England and beyond England. we've had years of affordable housing providers being stripped of grants and on funding. We had less and less focus by government and others on quality. We had changes to the welfare system, introducing more confusion, to my mind, than genuine help. We had waiting lists that are getting tragically long. We had more and more people living in substandard conditions or having no roof over their head at all. And now we have the COVID crisis. And what it did was just to lay bare just how important decent homes and decent places are for all of us, and particularly for people on low or no income. And I think Stephen Hill mentioned this morning in the session that in many cases, you know, decent affordable housing was a matter of life or death in many parts of our cities where living conditions actually contributed to the spread of the virus. So this is kind of getting more and more serious. At the same time, there's been very little coming from the UK government about affordable housing other than the build, build, build rhetoric. And now we have this massive question mark over the quality of the housing that's going to be built given the proposed changes to the planning system. So a lot more to kind of think and worry about perhaps for all of us. And what we try to do in response to, you know, questions, strategic questions like this at the Academy is to kind of examine problems, look at them from different perspectives and learn from each other and try to move towards a more positive outcome. And this is exactly what we want to do this afternoon. So we'll have a tour around England, Wales, Ireland, and we've just had a presentation from Denmark with a mixture of policy and practice examples and explorations. And I think we're going to focus a bit more on design quality than the conversation this morning. And actually what was really good this morning was some kind of positive vibes that came out of that, and saying that the COVID crisis actually is leading towards some more positive sort of things, such as, for instance, that the investors' expectations are becoming more realistic, and investors starting to consider longer term return models. We've kind of seen falling rents, certainly in England, and I believe elsewhere as well. More state support for the sector in places like Ireland. We've heard about that this morning, etc. So we're going to continue to move to continue with this positive story with our presentations, and we have 5 presentations, about 10 minutes each. So it's going to be quite challenging to keep us all to the schedule, but we'll try. And we'll start with Paul Hackett's overview of the policy context in England, and particularly the recommendations of the Affordable Housing Commission. So you will, if you attended our Congress and the housing event in February, you will remember Paul's contributions to that, and he talked about the work of the Affordable Housing Commission. They've done a lot more work since our last event, so Paul is going to tell us about that. And you probably remember Lord Richard Best's keynote at the Congress, and he gave us this fantastic overview of the affordable housing history over the last 40 years in England, and talked about some of the early findings of the Commission. So I'll hand over to Paul, and then I will introduce further speakers as we go along. So Paul, over to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Biljana. I'm conscious of the time. I just wanted to say quickly, though, what a great presentation from Tina, and I think it'd be a bit of a contrast, what she said to what I'm going to say. But I think sometimes I wonder why, you know, inequalities in the Scandinavian countries, in Denmark in particular, are so much less than they are in the UK. And when you look at what they're doing with housing, you begin to get a sense of why that is. And I think that's an important point, you know, in the way in which the work we do on housing sometimes seems a little bit sectioned off, but actually it's really connected to the bigger picture about the so-called good society and the way we live. So I thought that was a really, really useful contribution. I just wanted to take a policy snapshot, really, a policy perspective on a practitioner's perspective of what I think and what the Affordable Housing Commission has been looking at in terms of England. So forgive any prejudices or generalities and sweeping statements. I'm obviously conscious that there are lots of different housing markets, and there are plenty of excellent schemes in England. And Janice Morfitt, if anybody heard her this morning talking about local government and what it's doing, this is one of the examples. The problem we've got in England, I think, in particular, is that we just don't have enough good examples, especially involving affordable housing. So I'm going to give you a quick 8 minutes left tour of where we are and where we're heading, I think, in terms of affordable housing. It's sad to say, and I think it has to be said, and Biljana was just referring to it, that social and affordable housing in England has been in decline for quite some time, 30 years or more, and the sector's been very fractured and underfunded, and perhaps most depressing of all, stigmatised over that time. And I think unless we speak out as a coalition of the willing, I think the situation looks like it's going to get worse rather than better. I mean, the last decade, as people know, has seen a very sharp fall in the social housing stock, and that's partly to do with selling off of local authority housing under right to buy, but also very low build rates and escalating costs. Despite those lessons that we learned, I thought we'd learned in 2008, when I thought perhaps we'd be moving away a little bit from the cyclical system, that market-led system that we'd developed since the 80s, we seem to have gone backwards. And the policy and politics, certainly over the last decade in terms of affordable housing, has been very much as a backseat to a government's preoccupation with home ownership and first-time buyers, and largely a focus on new supply of mid-market private housing, something like what we just heard from Tina, quite the opposite in fact. And better placemaking, unfortunately, I have to say, from my experience and the work of the Affordable Housing Commission and the efforts to create mixed communities really have taken, I think, a backseat to property speculation, and more recently perhaps arguments around planning deregulation and tax cuts, stamp duty tax cuts in UK. I mean, I think for me and the Affordable Housing Commission, that perhaps the most worrying aspect has been the cut in capital subsidy for social affordable housing, which has been very dramatic, leaving our system quite dependent on, certainly for low-income renters, on welfare transfers, welfare payments, which have increased. And social landlords, housing associations in particular, have become quite reliant on funding sub-market housing from market sales and planning gain, which is not easy even in the best of times. And this market-led approach, I think, has been very good, let me say, for investors and landowners and house builders, and perhaps very good for existing homeowners who have become a cohort unto themselves. But I think it's been a pretty poor deal for everybody else. So housing has become, you know, and we documented this in our reports, and you can look at them when they're on the website, has been really a problem of becoming more expensive and more unaffordable. And as a result, we've seen, I think, a division emerging in our housing system, with home ownership actually staying pretty flat, social housing falling, and the change, which is what we identified in our report, being very much a shift towards the private rented sector. And I think the thing that's marked England out more than anywhere else, and I think even within Europe, I think has been this 10-year shift to the private rented sector, which has more than doubled over the last 20 years. And it's now larger than the social and affordable sector. I think it's worth reminding ourselves, and we talk about private rented sector as well, I don't want to go into it, I haven't got the time, but you know, we now have 2 million private landlords in England. 2 million. The vast majority of them are buy-to-let, very small, 1 or 2 properties. So this is going to be a very, very difficult sector to reform. And the problem we're facing, and it was identified in our work, and Lord Best mentioned it at your conference last year, was that it's now housing the private rented sector a large number and larger numbers of low-income households, and that's a real problem. We've now got 1/3 of private rented people in private rented properties, so-called living in poverty. So, I mean, that's just not a good sign. I mean, we don't think the sector's suited for that. Now, the pandemic, which, you know, is on everyone's mind, and which is why we're zooming here, has highlighted the problem, I think, of this over-reliance on this growing private rented sector, not just the health risks surrounding it, but also around affordability and higher rents. And I think it's worth just saying something about where we are with this, because we are completely adrift at the moment and uncertain as to what's going to happen to generation rent once COVID-19 support starts to fade away. Once the employment protection and the rent protection safeguards are withdrawn, we don't know what's going to happen. We're very, very worried about that. What we do know is that the social sector doesn't have the capacity to deal with it. It's not resilient at all. And, you know, the development of new rented homes, the sort of build-to-rent sector, which was growing, professional sector yet to really take off. Plenty of homes to buy, and there's lots of pent-up demand at the moment, but not for anyone on the average incomes in England, certainly not without the bank of mum and dad. So, you know, we're really looking at a whole cohort here of mid-income earners and below who are struggling, probably struggling renters. So we're expecting to see, as Biljana said, an increase in homelessness and overcrowding, and perhaps a lot of problems ahead, which is a rather bleak picture, but it's one that I think many of us could have predicted. I think that England's love affair with boom and bust, I think has been a lesson in how short-termism can cost you dearly when circumstances change. And I think, you know, if COVID taught us anything, it's the fact that we didn't quite get this right. And perhaps we're not the best example to follow in terms of that. What I think is important now, and obviously for this conference and for people to mull over and think about, and for the government to focus on, is what comes next, what can be done. We're saying to the government, the Affordable Housing Commission, that it can't any longer ignore the housing inequalities and imbalances in the system. At the moment, they're not listening, and there seems to be a political preference to get back to the status quo ante. Our view is that that could change. And just to finish really on how we think that could change, just to mention three things very quickly. First of all, the Affordable Housing Commission is advocating a kickstarting programme of social affordable housing. Let's build more of it. Take time, but it's critical as long as the subsidy's there. And the second thing we're doing is we're arguing for a housing conversion fund, which happened in the late 90s and in 2008, to convert some of the private rented properties, particularly in low demand areas, actually back to social housing, make it more secure, make it more affordable. And thirdly, we are arguing that planning shouldn't be seen as the problem and should be seen perhaps as part of the solution. Better placemaking, effective land capture schemes, etc. Things we talked about, the Academy of Urbanism, should be back on the agenda. But overall, I feel like, you know, it's worth saying and stressing that in England, we are in a very tight spot. A lot of money's been made out of the housing market in recent years, and very little of it has been put back in. And what we're advocating, I think, at the Affordable Housing Commission, and I think, you know, far and wide in terms of the social housing sector, is for government to take a good and hard look at what works in Europe. Might be worthwhile looking at the library that the Affordable Housing Commission's got on there, look at what works, rather than focusing on what I think is a real estate American model, which hasn't served us very well. So finally, just from my point of view, to just say that our fear is that unless things start to change quickly, we could be facing a future with even less social and affordable housing in England, which I think is something that we will have cause to regret. So hopefully a coalition of the willing is building up to get the government to U-turn. It doesn't seem to have a problem with U-turning in other policy areas. Let's hope that a U-turn on social and affordable housing is in the offering in the coming months as we move forward. Thank you.
The only U-turn that we could look forward to, I guess. Thank you so much, Paul. And interesting thoughts in your 3 points, especially the third point, I think will be mostly interesting to our audience, and perhaps we can touch on it later. And I had a question. I looked at your report, and for instance, your proposal to extend the right to buy was a bit of a question mark for me, so perhaps we can talk about it later in the Q&A. So thank you again, and we're going to move on to our next speaker. And we had to, again, work around people's schedules, so I'm going to introduce Sarah Newell, who's the Senior Executive Planner from Limerick City and County Council. We've heard quite a bit about the situation in Ireland this morning, so Sarah's going to continue that story, and we'll talk about a particularly proactive local authority, that is the Limerick, who are, you know, have massive efforts to deliver good quality social housing and affordable housing. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to share a screen now, so hopefully it will be available for you to see. Let's see full screen mode. Okay, can everyone see the presentation, the title slide? Okay, thanks, Biljana. So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to quickly just guide you through the practice of delivering affordable homes from a local authority's perspective in Ireland, and also at the end provide some reflection on the current affordable housing policy. And I'm going to keep it quite tight because I know we're under pressure with time. And the format of today's presentation will be just to provide a context and to discuss two case studies that the council are involved with at present, one in an urban context and one in a rural context, so more a county context. And then at the end, just some short reflections on potential tweaks to the policy that could make it a more sustainable policy into the future. So in Ireland, in terms of tenure, housing is generally segregated, with social and private housing delivered in distinct developments. And accidental tenure mixing would have arisen through government policies. So for example, tenant purchase, right to buy policy, or measures to support delivery of affordable housing through private developments. So what we call Part 5, which is equivalent to Section 106s in the UK. There is the delivery of a third tenure, which is affordable housing, but it's a relatively new tenure type in an Irish context. And it's specifically looking at a tenure in between social and private, targeted at an income profile, which I'll discuss a bit later on in the presentation. So in our view, mixed tenure is widely understood to mean the delivery of private and social. There's this dual tenure which is prevalent, but really we should be looking at it from the point of view of tenure mixing in terms of income. So we're moving into that space where we're looking at providing a variety of tenure and income mix. And especially this is very important in the case studies that I present later on in terms of providing affordable housing within established neighbourhoods. So just in terms of affordable housing policy, it's primarily delivered on publicly owned lands in Ireland under what is called the Service Sites Fund. And this fund was recently established by central government, and it's designed to fund infrastructure to allow for the building of affordable homes. And there's a maximum cap of €50,000 per new affordable home provided. So looking at affordability and how that relates to Limerick City, for example, we have here a table of income profiles, and one of the prevalent features of affordable housing legislation in Ireland is that there's a regulation that no more than 35% of your mortgage or your rental payment is paid out on rent or mortgage. So this is the benchmark for affordability enshrined in legislation. We don't have any bold figures on income cohorts for eligibility enshrined in legislation, but this benchmark is particularly useful when we're looking, and it's quite flexible, given that it's legally provided in regulation. So the following table gives a sense of how that 35% benchmark works in a Limerick context. And it's based on the best available information we have on the value of new build housing in Limerick. And really the point of this table is that meeting the 35% benchmark, we're really looking at a cohort of between 45,000 and 55,000. Anything over that is deemed to have been, you're able to satisfy your affordability criteria generally, and there isn't a need for a specific interventions such as this. So it's quite interesting, even though we have the 35% benchmark, we can actually drill down into our own statistics locally to see what the value of new build housing average is in our city and what incomes that would target, so between 45 and 55. In terms of a rural case study, we are looking at developing a pilot for an affordable plots for self-builders. So this is obviously a good policy intervention as an alternative to the one-off rural house which is unsustainable. And it also is a policy that we have developed with the collaboration of our councillors, our elected members in Limerick City and County Council. So this is a council-owned land bank. On the aerial, you'll see 2 red line boundaries. So those specifically relate to a social housing scheme that the council got planning permission for approximately 2 years ago. And the area in between is also owned by the council, but it has been sold or given over as on the condition of a grant of permission to an interested developer. So what we wanted to do as part of our planning permission for the site to the south of the aerial, which is the southern development area there, is to look at delivering 8 plots for affordable self-build. So because we're causing homes, affordable homes to be built, the legislation automatically kicks in for us in terms of the 35% eligibility criteria and a range of other conditions that we have that I'll go through now in the next slide. So last year with our councillors, we adopted a scheme of eligibility for affordable households. And essentially, it's a mechanism for us to be able to select the preferred households for those particular 8 plots, but also for other affordable dwellings that we're making available within the city and county. So as you can see in the onion diagram there, there's 5 key gateways a household has to get through to be determined as a preferred household for the affordable plot or affordable dwelling. So they're fairly fair and equitable in terms of you have to be eligible, so 35% benchmark. You have to be dwelling, so this means that you are a 3 or 4 person household meeting a 3-bed rather than a 1-person household looking at an affordable house that may be 4 bedrooms. So there's efficiencies in terms of council size, meeting the house type need. You have to be living in the area, you have to have a member of the household attending education locally, either primary, secondary or 3rd level. And then the 5th gateway is that you're working within a specified distance. So that's our sifting mechanism to determine the households for those plots. To be able to understand how we are to look at our affordability dimension for those plots, we have to understand the costs.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm having problems hearing you. I don't know whether others have the same issue. Perhaps if you just get closer to the microphone, maybe.
Sure, yeah. So to understand the affordability dimension for the plots, you have to understand the costs. So we looked at the delivery of a typical 4-bed house on those plots and taking into account the land cost and the construction cost and finance and build out cost, you're looking at potentially 326,000. So the opportunity to bring in an affordability dimension has been brought about by to eliminate the land cost. So the land cost on this particular plot is quite substantial at 48,000. So automatically you're reducing significantly the burden for a potential mortgage and making it more affordable for households. Just in terms of an urban context, we have 5 city sites as part of the Service Sites Fund that we gained funding for from central government last year. So 21 million in funding for 5 sites to deliver over 700 homes. So the Service Sites Fund includes enabling infrastructure, roads, water, drainage, and community facilities typically. So this table just gives an overview. I won't go into it, but gives you a sense of the type of infrastructural subsidy that's given to deliver affordable homes. And these are the types of sites, and each site has different constraints and opportunities. For example, Toplands is straddled between a relatively moderate house value area and a very low house value area, so there's issues there of affordability. In terms of Guinness Lands, it's quite close to our central train station. You see that to the north of the site, so literally less than 5 minutes walk. So there's pressures to deliver compact growth and increased density, and that infers apartment typologies. So we're looking at the viability of delivering apartments and whether it is viable to deliver apartments for affordable purchase, given that the construction cost. Okay. And then the Clonmacnon lands, issues with flood risk potentially on adjacent lands, but the other issues of connecting infill sites with city walls and archaeology is a key constraint on this particular site. And this site is a relatively high value site with good overlooking to the river. So just to end, and just the final 2 minutes, reflections on affordable housing policy from a local authority perspective.
Sarah, we lost your sound completely.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yep.
Yeah. So Service Sites Fund, the funding window is opened for once a year and therefore does not have the same flexibility of access as other funding streams that central government has. So there could be an opportunity for ongoing rolling Service Sites Fund to be made available. The second is subsidy and the private sector and the AHB sector, which is like the sector in the UK, and that is for private turnkey for the AHB sector as well. The third issue is viability and urban context. We have a cap of 50,000 per unit, but in certain sites that I showed you, sites with extensive abnormals, we would be looking to increase that subsidy to allow for those city centre sites to come forward for affordable housing. And the last issue, which I'm sure has been touched on before, is how do you ensure affordability in perpetuity? Currently, there's an equity share on this. After the share has been bought out, the house is free to be sold onto the private market. So issues in relation to how do you retain that house continually in affordability is something we're very interested in the council, and colleagues in another section of the council are looking at the possibility of land trusts and how you could have specific covenants for affordability enshrined. So that's just to summarise. Apologies for the communication glitches, but that's a summary of reflections from a local authority perspective. So happy to take any questions.
Great, Sarah, thank you very much, and apologies everyone for the sound quality. We did test everyone and it did work, but you never know with Zoom calls. So Sarah, really interesting to compare the Limerick's approach to Copenhagen's kind of mixed city, and you know what the implications of you know segregating different tenures might be for social mobility or creating resilient neighbourhoods, etc., which we can pick up on later. And also, it'd be interesting to hear from you how actually is the council delivering? Is it through a housing company of some sort, or in some other way, or directly? So we'll park that for the moment until our questions at the end of the session, if that's okay with you. I'd like to move to our Wales speakers, and we have a double act from Wales. We'll have first Carole-Anne Davies, who's the Chief Executive of the Design Commission for Wales, and she'll be focusing more on the policy context and talking about the work of the Design Commission for Wales, obviously related to affordable housing, followed by Toby Adam, who's the Director of the Gaunt Architects. So he will illustrate the current approaches to the design of affordable housing in Wales through a couple of examples, and both of which have received funding from government. So it'll be interesting to kind of compare and contrast. So welcome Carole-Anne Davies, and over to you.
Hi Biljana, how are we doing on the screen sharing there?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for inviting us. I was thinking that this probably picks up on some of the things that came up this morning as well with Janice Morfitt and other discussions about policy and delivery. So hopefully it will pick up on a few of those bits and pieces as well. Just a quick overview. Our journey in Wales has...
Make the full screen sort of
presentation. There you go, sorry. The journey in Wales of the Design Commission has been kind of parallel really to a very young government. We celebrated 20 years of devolution. So I've been listening to the discussions about government and policy and the history and long-standing positions. And of course in Wales we're working with a relatively young government And they did an awful lot of things in the first term, but two things stand out, of course, from our perspective. One was new planning policy and technical advice note 12 on design, and the founding of a design commission, which they have stuck with in policy and also stuck with in terms of funding us as the national advisory body in Wales. You'll be familiar with the service areas that we deliver across the audiences that we try to integrate. And I mentioned the design review service here only because we try to make it strategic and to assist. We stripped quite a lot of the theatre of review out. And because the particular focus of today, the Innovative Housing Programme, was a requirement for design review as part of the programme. We learn a lot from design review. We publish a lot from it, but in particular, we learn a lot about this ongoing conversation about places for life with homes at the heart of them, and also development in the rural context and what may or may not enable it in protected settings. So we've all been having this conversation for a very long time. Sometimes it comes out in guidance commissioned by the government from us to make, the Welsh Government's really keen to make this available as widely as possible, and we're often working with them or for them to deliver updated guidance that supports the policy position. TAN 12 is still with us. It was updated in 2016, but the latest evolution really, which has changed the game a bit since 2015 was introduced, was the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So here we've now got a piece of policy, a piece of legislation integrated with policy. And we're just beginning with the Innovative Housing Programme to learn how that is panning out. The Planning Policy Wales edition 10 of December 28 integrates the legislation and is place-led and prioritises a focus on people. And the first opportunity really to test exemplary, if you like, legislation and policy and practice has really been this consistent approach over the last 4 years of £90 million worth of public investment in housing innovation, particularly in affordable homes, particularly looking at energy strategies, affordability, and the inequity across housing availability and housing need. A really critical piece of work which informed this was More and Better, piece of work by the Welsh School of Architecture, who are still involved in this programme, and a huge amount went into designing the programme. The Innovative Housing Programme aims were, allied to the 7 goals of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Of course, it looked at the tensions between cost and value, aimed to provide support, disseminate the lessons, and that is ongoing. We are, as we speak, I am being nagged right now to line up reviews for year 4. And we're also involved in researching housing typologies which might be appropriate to the 7 goals of the well-being of future generations. So that's the legislative and policy background. And I'd like to hand over to Toby, who will look at just a couple of well over 100 schemes that we've looked at and what we're learning from the Innovative Housing Programme. So over to you, Toby.
Thank you, Carole-Anne. I'll just share my screen. So, yes, thanks, Carole-Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Toby Adam. I'm an architect and director at Gaunt Francis Architects. I've been a design review panelist for over 10 years. I've reviewed a wide range of residential projects with a recent focus on the Innovative Housing Programme. And I'm going to talk briefly today about quality in practice and delivery related to that programme, specifically through the lens of the design review process. So what I'm going to do is show just 2 examples from the 80-odd IHP schemes that have been reviewed to date. DCFW is in the unique position of having reviewed all the IHP projects across the housing market from a variety of providers, but always with a heavy emphasis on affordable housing. So we can see what the barriers are for those in the trenches and hopefully – offer some lessons across the affordable housing sector. So I'd like to jump straight in with some project examples that went through the design review process. The first, Glasdeer, is located on the edge of Ruthin, a town in Denbighshire in North Wales. This scheme struggled to convince the panel on the 2 occasions it was reviewed, and I'll come on to the reasons why this was. So the proposal is for 62 affordable homes promoted by a local housing association, and this site is a very typical edge of settlement infill. Typical in that it has a range of conflicting constraints. It's near to a new school. There is the risk of flooding. There is existing road infrastructure, and permeability isn't great. New house builder schemes nearby struggle with parking issues and don't really offer any sense of place. This is the scheme as it was presented to the panel at the first mandatory IHP review. The scheme was then refused planning and was brought back to DCFW for a second time with some changes. In their strategic feedback, the panel noted that a lack of thorough site analysis makes the rationale for the layout unclear. It also lacked a clear vision about the type of place it could be. The panel made the point that the site layout was being led by the constraints rather than allowing for a creative challenge or for positive solutions. In detailed terms, the panel thought that the scheme didn't address any innovative approaches to parking or a reduction in car ownership, and that the space given over to roads just seemed excessive. There was also concern about the maintenance burden created by lots of little leftover spaces, especially when you consider the long-term interest the client would have in the site. The second example is located on the edge of Gorsinan near Swansea, with fantastic views across the La Forestery to the west. This is a scheme that had positive feedback from the design review panel on 2 occasions and has many features that could make it an exemplar IHP scheme. It's expected to provide about 150 low carbon homes in a mix of tenures, including open market, and is a joint venture between Pobble Group and Coastal Housing Association. The scheme demonstrated a focus on houses, places and people that was often missing in other submissions. It was described as an excellent example of how to explore the integration of green infrastructure in a residential context. The SUDS integration is a particular feature of the placemaking and responds to Welsh Government legislation about SUDS. The scheme had a strong vision statement with a focus on quality, placemaking and green infrastructure. The landscape response is primary here, making rainwater management an important part of residents' daily lives by bringing it to the forefront of the design. Placemaking is carefully considered, with the central green space offering a landscape hub and potential for communal space in adjacent buildings. In fact, panel comments were limited to encouraging more detailed consideration of things like bins and bikes, making sure homes can function effectively. The kinds of strategic comments made in other reviews were not really replicated here. It was a chance to get into the detail, including the interesting idea for an on-site gardener who could maintain the specialist landscape. The IHP funding in this case enabled the developers to propose homes that are leading the way in terms of energy efficiency. The promoters called this a combustion-free lifestyle, which was a key part of the innovation proposal. I think this is a disruptive scheme in the sense that it is providing housing at a scale that matches the major house builders, but offers a level of design sensitivity and quality that the house builders probably aren't. The question is, might this lead to demand for mass housing to do better once people see what's possible? I think this is an example of how the IHP programme might move the market faster than would have happened otherwise. So after having reviewed almost 80 IHP schemes, DCFW is in a perfect position to draw thematic conclusions about design quality, which are then summarised and reported to the Welsh Government at the end of each cycle of reviews. Some of the themes are noted here, and all are very relevant to the delivery of housing, affordable housing projects. Innovation was limited to technology or construction methods in many schemes. Few projects included innovative site layouts, movement strategies, or urban design proposals, which is something of a disappointment. There is certainly a skills gap. It may be that design teams who are focused on the affordable housing market find it hard to develop the skills and experience associated with sustainable design or detailed knowledge such as passive house. The skills gap is also evident in local authorities who have suffered serious cuts to personnel and thus experience. DCFW is still seeing some highway authorities adhering to the long superseded Design Bulletin 32 rather than Manual for Streets, which is very frustrating. There is still a pervasive idea that people want traditional style houses, which limits the amount of truly contemporary design and innovation. But I think it's important to be clear that when design teams really engaged with the site, with excellent analysis and clear diagramming, the results were far better. The same goes for having a strong vision. Clients who already have a core competence in design, often in terms of experienced personnel, seem to provide better proposals. And lastly, allowing sufficient time for design within the programme means giving designers time to do their jobs properly. Yes, there are some programme and cost implications to this, but where clients are long-term property owners or managers, this seems like an easy win in terms of offering value for money. So to conclude, I think it's worth considering the benefits of a design review process. DCFW offers clients, design teams and local authorities the opportunity to engage in design debate with highly experienced practitioners from a range of disciplines at a very low cost impact in the context of the overall project. The opportunity for design teams to engage in peer review, so having to justify design decisions and present ideas coherently, benefits the project outcomes. Clients get a chance to see their scheme through different eyes, have their assumptions questioned, and it gives planning officers access to conversations about design that are often not possible within their own organisations. Welsh Government is using this programme to encourage new thinking about the nature of affordable housing and, importantly, to develop the industries and expertise that will be needed to support the innovation that is required. We may therefore ask, as has often been the case, is design quality sufficiently considered when funding is at stake? Well, both schemes I've shown today were successful in that regard, so I suspect that debate must continue, and it will be interesting to see how that debate develops in Wales in the current economic context. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. I mean, hearing you was like deja vu for me. Exactly the same things that we at CABE used to deal with 10 years ago or more years ago. And it was a conundrum that nobody resolved, you know, how to more closely link funding coming from government with design quality. And that's, we just have to keep at it, you know, pressing for it. But it's fantastic to hear actually that the Design Commission for Wales is thriving, you know, and we have a similar case in Scotland, whereas our CABE has been disbanded in 2010, and the government is starting to talk about establishing a new design quality body now. So we'll have to see what comes out of that. Thank you again, both. And we're going to move to our final presentation, and we'll hopefully have some time for questions. So I do encourage you to post your questions in the sidebar. Our final presentation is actually about a brilliant example of council housing and the first ever council housing winner of the RIBA Sterling Prize. You're probably familiar with it. It's the Goldsmith Street development in Norwich by Mikhail Richards Architects. And to present it here, we have Annalie Richards, who's one of the founders of the practice. I just read somewhere that the RIBA jury praised it as a modest masterpiece. So it's, I think it's an accurate sort of description of the scheme. And just to say also that Annalie is a part of the all-female Velo City design team that won the 2018 National Infrastructure Design Competition, and also the first William Sutton Prize that I mentioned earlier for design and placemaking for their design proposal for the delivery of affordable homes in the Oxford-Cambridge arc. So a lot of good stuff coming from Annalie and her colleagues in Velo City and in her architecture practice. So over to you, Annalie.
Thank you very much. I'll try and be quick, actually. Let me share. Is that worked?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I'm talking about Goldsmith Street, Norwich, by Norwich City Council. It's 100% social housing on secure tenure, and this is probably not a case study for how to do it because it's quite a complicated way that they actually delivered this. But it has embedded quality in the process. So. What they did to start off with was they had an international RBA design competition for council housing, which is a very unusual thing to do, and went through quite a kind of rigorous process, including involving the residents in choosing the winner. The brief was, when we got the brief, we were delighted because it really focused on sustainability and community as a kind of focus for the whole thing, and quality. So we designed, actually the scheme is very similar to our competition entry, but I have to really refer, from talking to the design, to a previous project we did, which was again a social housing scheme, well, for social rent for Orwell Housing Association in Suffolk. And this again was an RBA design competition which was looking for innovative, sustainable agenda, kind of very deep green housing. And we teamed up with Bureau Happold. We'd never really kind of done any environmental design before, and they suggested we do a passive solar scheme, which basically in those days, because it was before passive house computer programs, it was really just try and face all the houses south and don't overshadow each other, and try and get as much winter solar gain into the building, which led us to develop this kind of section, which actually you see in Goldsmith Street, which is a 15-degree roof, because that's the angle of the winter sun, and a spacing between the buildings that allows sunlight in winter to penetrate the ground floor of the building behind it. So don't overshadow the building in winter. And the way we dealt with it in Suffolk in terms of overshadowing was to stagger buildings. So taller buildings have space behind them for shadow, and the smaller buildings allow the sun to hit them. So it worked, but we didn't know how well it worked actually until Bureau Happold funded a post-occupancy analysis on a really in-depth post-occupancy analysis. They had sensors on every window checking sunlight, and what we learned a lot from that actually, but what we learned was that a passive solar scheme does work. It can massively reduce people's fuel bills. And so social housing with fuel poverty, it seemed like a really good approach to go forward in the competition for Goldsmith Street. So this is our passive solar scheme, really. You can see we also learned there was a bit of overheating, so shading was really important. But really, this is a scheme designed on passive solar principles. The site is very near, you can see the cathedral on the right, sorry, the castle. So it's very close to the centre of Norwich, very walkable. But it's also very near on the other side, the grey terraced houses, which is called the Golden and Silver Triangle, which are very desirable places to live in Norwich. And when we did a bit of analysis in the competition, we found out that they were 14 metres apart, very tight late Victorian streets. And I think we all know that 14 metres is a very difficult thing to get past planning, because everyone's insisting 21 metres is the perfect distance for overlooking. Where this comes from, no one seems to know. I've tried to find out. But we went into the competition saying we're going to do a 14-metre wide street scheme. What that means is that for the densities we were looking to achieve, which is about 90 dwellings per hectare, we could provide houses. Generally, at that kind of density, if you stick to 21 metres, you're talking 4-storey flatted accommodation with some houses. So this completely unlocked the site, and I'm not used to terrace. And so it meant that we could provide terraces of houses. The other schemes stuck to the 21 metres and were generally flats, and actually we kind of won it because the housing need in Norwich was for houses, not flats. And the way we overcame the overlooking, because we weren't allowed to just get away with it, was we did a scheme where every single habitable room faced the same way. So that also matched with this solar scheme. So habitable rooms face south. There's only one habitable room that faces north, and it's on the ground floor, and it's the living room. So the roofs are calibrated with the widths to ensure that we get sunlight to the ground floors of the buildings, even on the 21st of December. At some point in the scheme, in the design, Norwich said, could you make it passive house? And that way, it wasn't designed to be a passive house scheme, but actually the principles are fairly similar in a way. That passive house benefits from facing south and wind solar gain. Really, the principles are it's very highly insulated and very airtight with a heat exchanger. But the reason they chose passive house was because they'd done a bit of research. There was a local housing association called Hasto that had built some passive houses and some non-passive houses as part of a scheme for social rent. And they found that the passive houses were significantly more successful in that people were able to stay in them. So they were able to eat, pay their rent and pay for fuel bills. And there were less, evictions. And they kind of took this on board and, really wanted to achieve passive house at this scale, which at that time was quite, really a big challenge. But also they'd spoken to people living in these passive houses and found that their health had improved. So they really pushed us, and we'd never done passive house before. And actually what we've found out is that, doing a passive solar scheme leads on much more easily and more affordably to passive house. And the whole thing is really detailed around passive house. Even the window details are all about insulating frames. The movement is actually a timber frame building with cellulose insulation, so recycled newspaper insulation, and it moves, against the brickwork. So everything is kind of a result of that decision. Another amazingly, well, we persuaded them if they really wanted to get passive house, we'd not done it before, that we really would recommend a traditional contract, that we were on site all the time, making sure that it was built according to the drawings. And unusually for housing, they went for it. So we were able to do things on traditional contract, for example, talk to suppliers and do value engineering by kind of negotiating with people providing materials. So the roof finish is actually a cost saving of £300,000. As quickly on the landscape, other things they allowed us to do was quite innovative things for the landscape, like provide shared communal private spaces, the ginnels in the back gardens, and pocket parks. So these are some of that's the space in behind everyone's back garden that all the kids can access and meet each other, but it's also the way that you take bins out, and it's also where the services come as well. And they meet at places like this. So this is really kind of a pedestrian friendly, child friendly place. And I'm not really going to talk about the plans. So let's zoom through those, except it's not zooming. Oh no, got the wheel of death now. I mean, just to finish off the because of passive house, you need to make sure that there's no, you can't do indents or external things. So the brickwork, the outer skin of the brickwork does everything. It hides the post boxes, the electricity meters, creates shelter. And finally, at the end of the terraces, there are these blocks of flats. Everyone has their front door. So you can see there are 3 doors here leading to different flats. And the way that works is you either enter into your flat or enter into your own stairwell. So every single person has a front door, a letterbox, there are no common parts. And that's it really. I think things to take away, which would, you know, this was a dream job for an architect, traditional contract, really enlightened client who actually upped our eco aspirations rather than downgraded them. Yes, so that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Annalie, and right on time. And what a fantastic example.
I rushed the end.
Yeah, actually how through design, you know, you can address affordability and also health issues as well, as you mentioned earlier. So we have about 15 minutes left for our Q&A. And again, I encourage you to post your questions and I'll pick it up from the feed. And I'm going to start by asking, going back to Sarah's presentation. Sarah, I mentioned a couple of questions that I had for you. I know that you have to leave early. That was about, you know, the delivery model for the council. How do you actually do it? Is it through a housing company or some other way? Resource that the council has to put into delivering affordable housing? And generally your thoughts on the tenure mix and how, you know, how that can be improved or delivered through the work that you do at the council.
Sure, thanks, Biljana. So the delivery method is that we will use our planning permission system that we have in Ireland called a Part 8 process, and that will expedite the planning to get planning permission for the 5 sites that I gave in the urban context, and we also gained that for the Adair site. And I guess one of the reasons why we're going to do that is because it's an elected member's function. Now it is a planning permission, it's got extensive public consultation, but it has the benefit of the elected members being involved, which is really important. And the difficulty with going a normal planning route is that we have what's called a third-party appeals board called An Bord Pleanála, and it can get stuck in that system for a long time. So the risk to delivery, time is a major risk. So we're looking to de-risk by bringing it to planning and then going out to see if there's a market either through the AHB sector to deliver the affordable housing or through economic operators, so in other words builders or developers. So that's our model that we hope to test, and obviously it's dependent on a functioning proper housing market really, but we're using the powers that we have to de-risk it as much as possible through the government subvention and our planning system. In terms of
there was a question just to add for you from Claire McManus about asking you to comment on the affordability of the delivery and management of the properties that the local authorities is delivering.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's an issue in the UK, but certainly apartment viability is a huge issue in Ireland. It's quite expensive to build 1 and 2 beds. In terms of construction all-in cost. For example, in Limerick, it can be about 280,000 and the market value will never reach that if we wanted to sell it. And so that's where the discount has to come in through the subsidy. But also we need to look at ways to increase the subsidy further through reduced contributions. So development contributions, for example. It's a huge issue, apartment viability in Ireland, and it's just interesting to hear from others if they have the same issue. I'm not sure why it is. Maybe it's because we're an island and it costs more, but it definitely is an issue when it comes to apartments.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to go back to the issue of this link between quality and quantity, really. And that's a question for both Paul and our Welsh speakers and for Annalie. on the one hand, Paul, how do we make sure that design quality is considered on an equal footing as with quantity and affordability? And I know that the Affordable Housing Commission has focused more on the delivery and the policy sort of side of things, but you did mention towards the end of your presentation design quality and placemaking, and how do we actually bring that into the conversation? And on the other hand, for the designers among ourselves, you know, what are the best mechanisms? What are the ways of actually making sure that through good design we're addressing affordability and improving our ability to deliver quantity that is required? So quite a general question, but you know, under that you can link it with your presentation. So should we start with Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a concern to everyone what's happening in terms of the proposals that are coming forward at the moment to move towards more permitted development and to you know, offset that with some sort of concept of design codes coming from top down. Slightly worry about that. The Affordable Housing Commission's view was that we need to start resourcing local authorities better, of course, and need to start thinking about, you know, investing in design enforcement and coding and standards. I mean, this is something that we picked up on the survey work we did, that people obviously are feeling very bruised in local authorities from the cuts, but also concerned that the lack of social affordable housing is getting worse and worse, and that there might be a dash to provide social affordable housing in the way there was in the 60s, and in not all cases was it poor quality, but we certainly paid a price for it, and you know, it tarnished, I think, public housing for a generation afterwards. So we don't want to make that mistake again. I think at the moment, what I picked up from conversations I've had, Biljana, with social landlords, is that the concern at the moment is primarily focused less around design and more around fire safety. That is really preoccupying a lot of people's minds. It's very costly as well, so mustn't lose sight of that. What I think is a positive, and I hope I wasn't being too negative with my critique of what is a rather dismal situation in England, but one of the positives I think at the moment is that certainly the eco agenda does seem to be at the forefront of government's mind, but also on local government's agenda. And it's great to hear that from Norwich as well. You know, local authorities in the same sheet. You know, that's fantastic news. I think that the concern we've all got is that you know, the government sort of seems to be making it up as it goes along, and you know, we've all spent our lives trying to link together, you know, homes with places, good placemaking, good design. I mean, what we just heard now is fantastic. It can be done, but it does cost, and we need to have that conversation too. You know, that it's not a cheap and easy fix to just supply more homes for people on low incomes. You know, and that's not the answer. The other thing I just want to quickly just say that one of the things that's come across to me is that there is an appetite for innovation out there. We just heard it again from Norwich, but there is a genuine appetite. Janice Morfitt was mentioning this morning. I think, I mean, like, you know, they're pushing uphill here. I mean, you know, with the right support, I think an enormous lot of good quality social affordable housing can be done, and hopefully, and this is the other point really that we missed, hopefully on, you know, mixed tenure, mixed income plans for development. You know, one of the concerns that the Affordable Housing Commission had, and that we're seeing it elsewhere, is that we're almost going back to segregated housing, social rented in particular, separated, distinctly separated from private housing, you know, and that's probably a reflection, you know, as I mentioned before, of inequalities and disparities in communities. But it's a direction of travel that I think many of us would find quite difficult to support, and that we should perhaps be arguing in terms of design, etc., to support the bigger policy objectives of creating, you know, sustainable mixed communities that people are proud to live in. You know.
And thank you, Paul. And Carole-Anne, can I bring you in, and Toby, on your view on this question? What are the most successful mechanisms for actually pushing the design to the forefront?
I think the word mechanism is really interesting, and also just picking up on something Annalie said, that, you know, Goldsmiths was a
We lost you. We lost the sound completely. Toby, do you want to come in?
Shall I jump
Just
in?
comment there on working on the bigger mechanisms of.
Carole-Anne, we lost your first couple of sentences. So
Oh,
you
did you?
Yes.
Oh, and it was amazing too. Sorry. No, I was just picking up on the opportunity that Annalie highlighted there with the Goldsmith Street. I mean, a great scheme, brilliant to see a scheme like that win the kind of accolade, real kind of game changer. But also Paul's comments then on working on the kind of machinery of policy and government, if you like. And we've tried, that's why the presentation today was double-handed, that we really try to work with our government partners to shape their policy ambition. We've been fortunate to have continuity of government, continuity of support, and then on the other side of it, continuity of 38 people that contribute to the Commission, their expertise, and we learn and we think and we shift and we change to try to get the quality of conversation galvanized that sort of Tina was referring to this morning. Mechanisms are tricky, sticks, carrots, there isn't a mechanism for thinking and the creative problem solving that design's really about, and that kind of expertise. And if there was a silver bullet, we probably wouldn't all be here still grappling with it. It's kind of worth grappling with.
Just to pick up on that, I think it's interesting. You see from Wales, I think we have quite a well-organised system of policy. It's quite organised, it's quite well tiered, it's joined up, we've got the right legislation, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in place. So, the mechanism, you could argue, is there. I think it just shows that this is a long game, and you've got to be patient, which is potentially a problematic message these days, with everyone wanting quick results, but these things take time to develop. And the other message I'm kind of getting is that I don't think government and councils, they should never underestimate the power of governance, and they should possibly embrace, the courage of their convictions, where they want to put, clearly in Wales, they want to put design at the forefront. They've set the mechanisms up in that way, but as I hinted in my presentation about which schemes got the funding, I understand there are political issues at play, but maybe they can leverage their power in a more active way, and that would help.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything, Carole-Anne?
Well, I think one of the other things is that the multidisciplinary industries that are part of this conversation also, I think, owe something to enriching the debate. We are all about placemaking and all about high quality urban design, and we continue to have conversations about housing in isolation. So we feed this kind of machine in some ways, don't we? And I think maybe thinking more about the role housing plays in unlocking wider placemaking, trying to establish really effective challenges to the inequality that we see across the whole of the UK. The report in The Economist recently that the UK doesn't have poor patches, it has a poor half. So the disparity in inequality is quite wide. And this is a big challenge. I think maybe on Toby's point about patience, I think we'd like to be more impatient, and I know that our minister, if she was here, would be saying, come on, we need to get this done. So she's wonderfully impatient, and that's a huge benefit.
That's the best thing that you can have, impatient politicians who are pushing you to do the right thing. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just looking at the watch, so we have a couple of minutes left. So I'd like to go back to Annalie, to you and your fantastic example. I think we're all fascinated and delighted that it's possible to have good schemes like that. So for you, what are the kind of the main ingredients for help? Within the council, was it inspired politicians and officers who push for this, and how can we inspire and encourage other councils to do the same? And a bit about the cost. How much more expensive was it to deliver a passive house scheme, and how was this kind of sold by, you know, those people who commission your scheme to the council and to, you know, other colleagues within there. Again, lessons for others related to that. And we had a question about the funding and the cost.
Okay, there was no funding from the central government. It was various pots of money, including right to buy receipts that funded the scheme. It was driven by very, you know, there were great individuals behind this, which I think is key actually. And just I mean, one of the people that made it happen in the way that it did was actually the highways engineer, who discussed.
Can you give us his name or her name? Who allowed us to do things that highway engineers normally don't do, which is reduce carriage widths, make cars wait, reduce the parking requirements, because it was demonstrated that people in one-bedroom social rent don't own cars. So all those things have made a streetscape that we're finding almost impossible to deliver on other schemes. And I think everyone focuses on the houses, but my beef is with what's outside the houses and what we're required to put in a bid to allow cars to go as quickly as possible and overtake bin lorries when they're there once a week. And, you know, quality of public realm has to be about designing it around people and not cars. I have a whole lecture on this topic, but yeah, forward-thinking individuals, planners that were willing to negotiate on overlooking distances and find solutions that they were happy with. All of that, you know, implies a very proactive council. So, and it cost, I mean, I think that, you know, Norwich are now looking at how much it cost. It cost probably 10% more to build Passive House. It was £185 a square foot to construct. But they've recently done a scheme where they did some Passive House and some non-passive building regs private sale, and they got 5% uplift in sales, and the Passive House ones went like that. They probably underpriced them. So certainly the cost of Passive House would be borne out in sales, is what they're finding. So we need to be, people will be willing to pay more if they know that their fuel bills will be massively reduced forever. And there's not enough information out there about that. And a couple of people commented on the fact that the scheme went through the design competition, which is something that not many local authorities are prepared to do these days, unfortunately. But this shows just how great a result you can get by going that way through design procurement. I'm afraid I think we've run out of time. We've had so many fantastic presentations today. It's almost impossible to pick any particular ones. And I hope that, like me, you've heard a lot of new stuff and are inspired to go out and lobby our governments and work with developers and investors and become maybe a developer ourselves, just like the Sue has shown this morning, or be a community builder, and in any case to be the agent of change that we want to see around us. So go out and improve housing in any way you can. So I'll wrap it up here, and I just want to ask if Tony, if you want to say a few words to close the event.
Thank you, Biljana. Thank you. I'd echo what you've said. I just want to touch on a point that Annalie Reaches made. The source of the 70-foot back-to-back dimension is Parker and Unwin, 1909. They went out into a field and wanted to see the point at which they could see the nipples through their shirt. And they determined that that was the distance one needed for privacy. Unwin subsequently served on the Tudor Walters Commission in 1919, which became the Homes for Heroes manifesto. And his book spread all over the Anglophone world. And that is the source. One of the reasons I think your scheme is so fantastic is, in some ways, I believe that there's a tyranny in that 70-foot rule. And I think your scheme in Norwich proves that we built better city and better neighborhoods and places before that rule came in. So you've done us all a great service by the illustration. But to go on, I shouldn't.
I just say thank you for telling me that. Thank you so much for telling me that bit of information. I've asked so many planning departments.
I'll have to talk to you separately. It's a much longer story, but anyway. Anyway, just to say to everybody I hope everyone has enjoyed the day. I'd particularly like to thank our partners, the RIAI, who have been a huge support to the AOU in this event. I want to thank our team at the AOU, Olga Gaetani, Stephen Gallagher, and Delano Bartstewart. Olga has gone through hell over the last month or 6 weeks, dealing with problems, solving them, ringing late at night and early in the morning, but she's done a wonderful job. I think you'd all agree. I also want to thank our chairpersons, Stephen Hill and my colleague Biljana Savic, who really added to the day and made it really interesting. And finally, and most especially, I'd like to thank all of the speakers, because I think what we've shown today, I said at the beginning, that we've opened a new area of operation and opportunity for the Academy. We've shown that we can, our problem in the past was organizing an event brought people in from abroad. We can now reach a worldwide forum to the very best and most interesting. We can also reach all parts of the region and nations of Britain and Ireland. And I think we've proven that today. So I look forward to the subsequent event we have next February. We have 2 other things which you heard about today. The AOU UTG joint event, which is in 2 weeks' time. We've also, at the end of October, a very interesting, for most of the people who've attended here today, on regional cities. We're looking at the Cambridge, Oxford, Milton Keynes Arc. We're looking at an arc up in Scotland, and we're looking at an arc in Ireland, the Cork, Limerick, Galway, Waterford Arc. And finally, Wolf Deisegang from Freiburg will be looking at a regional city there, which is probably one of the European exemplars. So they're all coming up, and they hopefully we'll see you again. So thank you all, and I hope you've enjoyed the event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.